Thank you. Enjoy.
So yes, I am Rossi. That memoir, by the way, was the original title of the one you have. First started out as The Devil and Mrs. Goldstein. But it kind of morphed into The Raging Skillet. So now you get to know the original title. I still like that, so maybe my second book. I'm widely known as Chef Rossi, owner of The Raging Skillet. But you might feel more comfortable calling me by the name I grew up with. I think I'm going to grab the handheld mic. It's okay with you. Can you still hear me? Yes. So that name is Slava Davida Shana Bashanarol. It sounds kind of elegant, right? Like sung to the tune of supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Slava Davida Shana Bashanarol. I just did that for Ted. But I never heard it that way. I only heard it ever screamed up the stairs when I was in trouble, which was always. So it sounded a little more like this. Almost always followed by, "For crying out loud!" Now, think about that for a second. I mean, what the hell does that mean, you know? Like, are you saying, like, I'm for crying out loud? Or are you saying I'm firmly against crying out loud? Like, I never really knew what it meant, but that was how I heard my name. So it's pretty easy to understand why I went from Hungarian Jew to Italian in 0.5 seconds. And Rossi was born. Now, I grew up what you might call lowly Orthodox. It's the best way I can describe it. Or perhaps the Reader's Digest version of Orthodox. Like, for instance, you know, we kept the meat and the dairy dishes separate, the meat and the dairy dishes forks separate, but we could have the fish sandwich at McDonald's. And then there were certain abbreviations of our kosher. So for instance, like if you use the meat fork in the dairy cheese, you know, what is the rule? Are you supposed to bury it on the ground for six weeks or 6 days? Does anyone know? However long you're supposed to bury it on the ground, we would bury it on the ground in the yard and then just forget about it. My father would like put tomato plants over it, and it just would be like an anthropologist in 100 years will be like, I don't know what it was about Jews of that century, but they just buried their silverware. So instead, my mother always had an enormous collection of rubber plants that she always got for free for opening up Christmas Club accounts. So she would put $1 in a Christmas Club account and get a free rubber plant, and then she would close the account immediately after Christmas. So we would have like 100 of these rubber plants. So when, you know, we were 3 rotten kids, we were always using the meat fork and the dairy or whatever, she would say, just stab it in the plant. So we would stab it in the rubber plants. Now the problem was we could never remember how long it had been in the rubber plant, so it would just stay. And the plants would grow. And then as they grow, they would be like impaled with a fork and a knife. And so when my friends would come over after school, it looked kind of like Harriet's House of Horrors. That was my mother's name, Harriet. The plants were all stabbed and harpooned. So, you know, it was bad enough they had to walk in through 1,000 flashlights, compliments of various banks, who had given them to my mother for opening a Christmas Club account, then closing it for $1. U.S. Bank, do you do that? Can we open a Christmas Club account for $1 and get like a flashlight?
Next year.
If you do, name it after Harriet. So they would walk in past 1,000 flashlights, and then there would be like hundreds of bags of pretzels that were all marked 3 for $1, that my mother got for free because she had triple coupons, and then all the stabbed rubber plants. So this was my mother's kosher. There's another thing that was kind of interesting. So let's say there was a Mrs. Paul's fish sticks for $1.99. Well, my mother not only would put on on her glasses, but also her magnifying glass. She wanted to examine everything on that package. Where was the koshrid? Is it koshrid? I always pronounce that wrong. Koshrid, right? Thank you. So where was it from? Was it an OU or an OK or, you know, an all right? But let's say the Mrs. Paul's fish sticks was on sale, and let's say she had a coupon for 50 cents off, and let's say the ShopRite was doing a triple coupon sale. So now the Mrs. Paul's fish stick was not only free, but I think they were going to owe her some money. In that case, it was blessed by the great Lord himself. It was completely kosher. Couldn't be more kosher. Don't even look at the ingredients. I know for a fact it's kosher. So this is like the way my mother held court. Now, a lot of people have asked me why I became a caterer, especially why I became a wedding caterer, which is a very specific kind of animal. And I have a lot of different reasons, but it's almost like, you know, when you go to therapy, you know, the therapist will say, you know, if you want to know why you did something, you just go back to the source, you know. So of course, you know, the immediate, you know, for the money, why do we do most things, you know, for the money. But that's not why anyone becomes a wedding caterer. It has to go a little deeper than that. So I would trace it to the circumstantial part of it, which was that I was a bartender in the 80s. And I was one of those old school kinds of bartenders, you know, where I would have the same 30 drunks all day long. They would hang out at my bar. I was like the Jewish version of Cheers. Let's call it Jeers. So I would have these 30 drunks hanging out, and the kitchen would close. It'd be 10 o'clock. They would have their shift drink and go home. And I would be stuck with my 30 drunks with nothing but Pepperidge Farm goldfish to soak up the booze. So I started going into the back, into the kitchen, and inventing things for them to eat. Now there were always tortilla chips, and there was always leftovers like buffalo chicken and meatballs and whatever. So I started to make the nachos of the night. So like buffalo chicken nachos, tuna melt nachos, spaghetti and meatballs nachos. Try that, it really is better than you think. And after a while, I started to get this big cult following for Rossi's late night nacho fest. I mean, it wasn't like the food was so fabulous, although, you know, if you're drunk at midnight, you know, buffalo chicken nachos is kind of great. But it was because it was free, let's face it. And I kind of got this solar plexus feeling, the same feeling when I would get if I wrote something great or painted something great from making up the nachos. So I figured, you know, I guess I'll learn how to cook. But that's not why I became a wedding caterer. Because, you know, you're like, what, so people wouldn't throw up on your bar and you became a wedding caterer? We have to kind of go back a little deeper than that. So I'm going to go back all the way to when I was 13 years old. And my mother, you know, we were all like, this is the 70s, you know, we wanted to eat normal kids' food. We wanted pizza and pasta and things like that. My mother was cooking food that all ended in a lot of like goulash, kishka, you know, food that simmered for longer than relationships I've had. I have seriously dated people for a shorter amount of time than my mother's goulash cook cooked. What can I say? I was a slut in the 80s. I'm reformed. We were always like, Mom, you know, can't we just have spaghetti? Can't we have pizza, something normal? Shut up and eat it. So we would eat it. Anyway, one day my father comes home with a big box, and we were like, a big TV, you know, we're all excited. Out comes this kind of computerish looking monstrosity. It was my mother's first microwave. My mother took some tomato soup out of a packet and she added water, and she put it in the microwave and she pressed like 100, and ding, out came tomato soup. And my mother screamed, try it, try it! It only took 1 minute! 1 minute! Well, that was the end of food as we knew it. From From this point on, it was kind of like everything we had for dinner was like an astronaut could eat it.